What is up, gamers? In this video, I'll be making a premium tier list going over all the best decks and all the worst decks in this current format. Going into this format, because of history collection and the combination of the ban list hitting Steam Maiden, we had no idea what the meta was going to be. It was completely wide open because there was so many changes for almost every clan, and there was a lot of deck building that needed to be done. And now that we're a few months into the season, we have a pretty solid idea of what the meta is going to be like. So here is the tier list. So BDIFs. So BDIF means best deck in format, and there's not one best pick at the moment. There's quite a few. There's solid picks. These are decks that can top and have already shown they can top a few times. There's Rogue, where in specific events they're either really good there, or if you're really proficient at the clan, you can do really well with them. Locals, these decks aren't terrible, but they're barely not good enough for the events, and if you're trying to win, you probably shouldn't be playing these clans. And then good luck in esports, these clans are just really bad. So we'll start with the BDIFs. First one being Naokami. Naokami is probably your safest pick in this format because it will just auto win you games due to the nature of the deck. Sweep Command and Exterminate are still really, really good, and having a front row to give plus 20k to is still really solid. The deck before was okay going first. It wasn't that great, but now with Vanquisher, it's become a bit better where you can start setting up your bind a little bit and also generate 2 excels. So then whenever you end up going Exterminate the next turn, then you're able to have 3 excels potentially, maybe even 4 if you went to 4 damage, and you're able to just slap the opponent super hard. It also has one of the strongest early games in the game, and it's super consistent. This deck will just auto win you games because of how this deck plays, and it also has a fairly good matchup in the almost all of the meta. One of the other best decks is Granblue. So Granblue got really, really good this format because of the Night Rose change. And the Night Rose change just like opens the floodgates of so many combos for this deck. And you can very easily just set up into a Bartholomew turn and have that as your insane kill turn. So you have a really solid early game, a decent grade 3 turn, and then you just have insane defensive plays. This deck probably has the best defensive plays in the game right now. And then you have an insane late game through Bartholomew and just attacking multiple times in a turn. Now, for Granblue, you need to be really, really proficient at it in order to do well with it. If you don't have probably like 200 plus games on this deck, I don't think you're going to do as well. You'll still get like pretty far, but you need to be super, super proficient with this deck because there's so many different decision trees and constant options you need to be making. It also has a really solid matchup into Naokami because of Bell being able to just unbind everything. And yeah, so Granblue is one of the other best decks. And then the last one I'm putting in this category is Chaos Breaker. Chaos Breaker is really solid. Now, the history collection changes didn't really add anything to it. It didn't give it like a better first stride because that's all Messiah stuff. But because of the aggressive nature of some of these other lower tier decks, you're able to really lower the power because you can steal their markers. And then you can also just completely shut them out of being able to do their game plan. So like against Naokami, now they're trying to generate more Excel markers so their Exterminate turns are stronger. Now Chaos Breaker can steal those Excel markers and just have generally more power since they're generating more markers naturally and just completely disrupt the Exterminate turns. Whenever you're going first into other matchups, then if their markers are very scary on the history collection side, then what you can do is with Chaos Breaker, you can give them a force marker. And since they got that force marker, they can't gain any gift markers from their strides. Because of naturally the increased amount of gift markers people are gaining, but them being more restricted on how they get them, Chaos Breaker became a lot better through that. Because of the harmonics change, this deck can survive a bit better going second. And yeah, there's just a lot of things going well for Chaos Breaker. So I think these are the 3 best decks. Granblue might not be as popular, but it's still one of the best decks. And now we'll just go through the rest of them in the order they're in here. So Angel Feather. So this is basically Gavael Gize. I think it's Rogue. I don't think the deck is good, but it's really good at beating the players that haven't played against it before. So if you know your BCS is not going to have as many good players in it, then Angel Gize can be really good in there. but it folds under Chaos Baker and Mega Colony because they both just like lock them out of getting all their markers. And then plus the Harmonix Messiah change made it a lot easier for players to play through the Gizeh damage denial that they usually do. Aquaforce, I think, is locals. I haven't super play tested into this, or I haven't played with it either, but from my understanding of the deck, it gets completely dumpstered by Honolly, which at the moment Honolly has slowly been getting cut out from decks because it doesn't affect the top meta that much. And it literally just stops you from losing to random stuff in Swiss rounds. Also, the effectiveness of Ride Down lowered quite a bit because of History Collection and people being able to make their plays the moment they hit grade 3. This deck can still farm advantage. It still has a decent grade 3 turn, no matter which Thavas form you're going. But it also doesn't have the strongest late game that a lot of these other decks have. So with these top 3 decks, Grand Blue, they have Bartholomew, which is a very forced card. Chaos Baker, they have Glue Ball or Deluge, and they're usually just gonna choke you out of resources the entire game. Narukami, they have the GB8, they have Exterminate for the 3rd time, they have Voltage. Like, all these decks have really strong ways to end the game, and Aquaforce struggles a little bit with that. Next is Bermuda Triangle. This is gonna be a solid pick, so we'll talk about Highlander first. Highlander is good. It still has probably the strongest grade 3 turn, and then Heltrata just makes it like super insane. It doesn't fold under Honolly, and it still can just like high roll you into oblivion. It makes up for the fact that a lot of these decks are a lot slower, and Highlander can kind of just push through them. And because of Heltrata, it can bounce the locked cards back from Chaos Baker, so that matchup is a lot harder for them. Against Mega Colony, you can bounce your stunned cards back to hand as well. The deck still has the option to ride down in specific matchups if it needs to. Highlander is still a very, very good deck, and I'm fully expecting to see it still. Now, the other stuff is the mill decks. So there's Melista and then Eve Loop. They both basically do the same thing where they deck the opponent out. Just Melista has a chance to just do it turn 3, while Eve will do it every game turn 4, basically. Yeah, these decks lose conditions are basically if they brick or if they die before then, which currently, because of the slower format we are in, it's a bit harder to kill them instantly. A lot of the rogue decks can, but yeah, you basically need to be able to kill them on a low damage count and try to do it consistently. These decks are super unhealthy for the game. I don't know why Bushiroad didn't hit them during the last ban list, but yeah, it's a thing we have to play around now. For the most part, you shouldn't see many of these, but sometimes it just takes one to like ruin your tournament run. So yeah, I think all of those Highlander and the mill decks are solid picks right now. Darky Regulars, probably Rogue. NLK won an event. Charhot got 9th in Chicago, and I think the Charhot deck is pretty good because most people don't actually know what it does. NLK is still just like good. From my understanding, No Life King has a terrible Link Joker matchup because you have one less. If they just lock one spot, then a lot of your combo turn becomes way weaker, and then Narukami will just bind your shit mid-battle phase and then just make it harder to combo off. The deck also kind of sucks into Honolly a bit, but NLK is still NLK. It will high roll you and kill you a lot of times. And then Charhot, I think, is pretty okay. The deck mostly loses to itself a lot of the time, but these are still decks that can potentially top if the pilot's really, really good and if they just have like a good day. D-Police, solid pick. This deck will just auto-win games naturally because of Linka and Unibird or Excalibur, but also this deck can fight into these later game decks because at that point you're able to build up more Geoma Glasses face up, have Die Liner give extra shield value, have the newest G-Guard be able to recover these grade 3s as giant shields, and this deck is just like super consistent at what it does. It just sometimes won't kill, and the deck doesn't have much of an early game, but because of the nature of this current format, it can get away with a weaker early game. And yeah, DP doesn't super care about all these control stuff. Now, Mega Colony is like a 50-50 from my understanding, but Mega Colony like prevents DP from being able to use either of the loyals, and DP might have to sometimes rewrite into something not Die Liner in order to keep playing, but sometimes Unibird or Excalibur will just kill someone outright. and you can also damage choke people very well. Like, this deck is still pretty solid. It's been topping basically every event. I don't think it's won any, but it's done very well in every event at least. So yeah, I think it's a solid pick. Gear Chronicle, probably Rogue. I'm not sure what the best build is at the moment. Unless your name's Dave Vecht, then every build's a good build. But them having Enter on a go to 1 makes this deck a lot worse because you're not generating as much advantage consistently. But this deck still has insane combo potential using Time Leap cards from 8 years ago. And if they're on Chronojet, then they're able to do all of this while you're on grade 2, which is still really, really good. Just the deck can sometimes lose to itself a lot of times. Although, from my understanding, this will change once the Ride Fixer comes out. But yeah, I think Gear Chronicle's like okay. Genesis, probably locals. Regalia is still okay. Fenrir, I haven't seen anything on, but Regalia can still just like sack you. But there's just better decks that do what Regalia is trying to do, but better, like Dimension Police. Now, Regalia does have a pretty solid Narukami matchup because they can't get rid of your board. So it makes Extreme turns a lot weaker. It makes Stunverse weak. Like, Regalia will dumpster on Eradicators, but it has a hard time into a lot of other stuff. Great Nature, also locals. I think this deck isn't bad. I don't know what it's lacking to not make it good right now. I think it's because it still has the same issue as before. It has the same issue as before where you don't have an early game, but also the history collection change didn't change that much for it, mainly because that big belly doesn't like give you a ton. For all of the multi-attack plays, they need Counterblast for Crayon Tiger for the Amazing Professor big belly, but it does give the deck a play when going first. And then once this deck starts striding, it becomes really, really scary. It also is weak to Hanali. So I guess this deck just like is a worse version of other combo attack Excel decks that have just higher inevitability like Nova Grappler. Next is Gold Paladin. Gold Paladin is a solid pick to me. Because of the slower meta, this deck can get away with stalling the game a lot easier. And because they're on original Gurgrit, they have access to the Guard from Deck skill multiple times in a turn. So now how the deck plays is you fuel your soul with like the Solan crits, the Gurgrit crits, and then and then Aglavale. And then late game, you just stride Ultima, Reedy 15 times, and then have your triggers give 70k to your board. So whenever they Ultima, you basically just win the game right there. And yeah, it's pretty consistent at getting that to that point. This deck doesn't need to like do a ton early, and it can, because of that build, it can play through Hanali now. I don't know how much it changes when Hanali isn't present, but yeah, the Ultima build is still really good. It has a lot of decks have a hard time breaking through and trying to kill golds by then. Kagero, good luck in esports. This deck is ass, man. It's one of my main clans, and I have been trying to make this work. I've been trying to make this work, and I've tried some of Fuzzy's ideas, because he's also a Kagero player. And it's just like such a struggle a lot of the time. The history collection changes didn't really add anything. Like Blademaster Muhammad just retired too. The only thing it really does is it gives force acceleration in this clan, which this deck didn't have before. The only way it could accelerate force markers was through Seal Dragon Blockade, but then you're playing Seal Dragon Blockade. So yeah, Kagero is just like struggling. Its turn 3 is not really impressive anymore compared to everything else. And then there's still the Rebirth build. If you are topping with Rebirth build, then you should go get a lottery ticket that day. So yeah, Kagero is really bad, unfortunately. Mega Colony, solid pick. So Mega Colony destroys Granblue basically every time. It has an okay matchup into D-Police, into Chaos Breaker, into Highlander, and it has a really good matchup into Golds here. It just loses to Narukami if the Narukami player like knows what they're doing. But Mega Colony is basically like the best noob check deck, where if the opponent doesn't know what they're doing, Mega Colony will just completely make them hate the game. And if they did not prep for it, then it really sucks. I'm on the team that Ghidorah should be banned, even though the deck isn't winning really a lot. It's topped a few times this season already, and Ghidorah is just like a super toxic card that like blocks out half the mechanics in the game. And then with combination of Darkface, it becomes really, really hard to play through it if you haven't played against it before, because with those combined, Ghidorah shuts you out of Superior Calling, it shuts you out of G-Guards, it stuns your whole board, and then anything you call, Darkface will proc, and they'll usually have 2 instances of it or during your turn. It's just like super annoying to play through, and if you don't have another grade 3 each turn, then you just auto lose because you can't stride. Since whenever you stride and your Vanguard's vested, it strides in the vest. So yeah, the deck is just like super annoying. It's the second best control deck, or I wouldn't say second best. It's one of the best control decks right now. And it's just like keeping other decks out of the meta. Now, if you don't live in the States, then you're probably not ever facing against this. Apparently in Europe, they only play Eradicator and Chaos Breaker. And a lot of players think the deck isn't good, but the deck is still like going to thrash people. So yeah, Murakumo. Good luck in esports. It's probably more locals now because Hanali has gone down in priority. The deck looks really good on paper, right? You have a okay early game. You have a really strong grade 3 turn with Yasui and Train, and then you can farm a shit ton of cards off of Fight Sickle. And then you have really strong end games through the Shiburaku Victor loop, through the last Premium Collection Stride, and then all the Shirayuki's minusing power. Like, this deck, in theory, is really, really good. It just really hurts into Hanali. The deck is pretty piece reliant, so if you don't find everything, it becomes a bit harder for this deck to actually win. And a lot of the control decks kind of just shut this out. Mega Colony makes it unable to play. Chaos Breaker hurts quite a bit. It's still playable in there, but it still hurts a little bit. Because you're farming Excel markers, Eradicators gain more power. Granblue can find Hanali. All of the best decks have ways to play through Murakumo, and it just becomes super hard for this deck to actually like compete right now. Now next is my main clan, which is Level Grappler. I think with the Cosmo Lord build, this deck is like locals tier. Cosmo Lord build sucks in my opinion. But once you find how to build it, it's in a solid pick. Stephen Lee just won Vancouver with it, and he was playing Zubat Battler and Gulsachi and Jarahawk in there. Which those cards I would say is the way to go for this clan, because a lot of the decks right now, they're trying to stall the game. Okay. How do I explain this? So Victor is really good right now. Now, people might think, oh, Hanali exists. This deck struggles in the Hanali if you're not playing Cosmo Lord build. I say you're incorrect. You have access to Spiral Breaker and Gimbaru Gun, which are Soul Blast ways to restand. They're also self-sufficient, so you don't need to call a full board in order to play through it all. You have absurd power levels through Meleaki and Sazanda, and you're able to play through some of these control decks like Chaos Breaker because you have access to Gulsachi, which has resist, so then they can't lock it anymore. And also you have access to Dogen Titan, which can unlock your rear guards and free up those spots, so then you can actually like use those rear guards again. Against Mega Colony, you're playing a deck that says stand on every card. So pretty good into that matchup. Now this deck does struggle into Erads because you can't get Excels off of Victen unless you have a really strong power turn, and then you're able to survive the next turn. But yeah, that matchup is super hard for Victor. But for the most part, just generically, this deck can play through Hanali and still hit like a truck. This deck has one of the strongest turn 3s in the game because the moment you ride grade 3 and you stride Victen, you get 2 Excels, which automatically activates your Sazandas, and you also have your Generation Break active, which activates all your really good cards that came out in 2018. So that gets your Meleakis, your Gulsachis, your Jarahawks active, all of that. And then plus you have 2 restands with it. And then in the control matchups, you're able to stall the game out, and you have 2 of the best finishing strides in the game through Dryger and Favorite Champ. Like, this deck has so much going for it now. The only thing that's like weak into is early game, which is why Eradicators kind of smash this deck right now. But into everything else, it's able to actually compete and does really well. Neonectar, I think, is Rogue right now. Some people think it's like a lot higher. I think it's okay. It has a really good early game, and it has an okay first stride if you end up doing Asha stuff. If you don't play Asha, then your turn 3 is like kind of bad. But once you get to Katrina, then you're able to like have really strong high-powered plays. And this deck is kind of like Narukami Light, in my opinion, except instead of removing the opponent's board a lot, you're generating free attackers. So you're plussing in a different way. Although this deck auto loses to Mega Colony, Link Joker has a fun time into it. Like, if you want to compete in this meta, you basically have to be able to play through Mega Colony or Chaos Breaker, and sometimes both. And Neonectar can't really do that. It struggles with that quite a lot. This deck just has like all around good turns a lot of the time, and it has cool defensive plays if you're on Enos, so then you can be on a high base power. But against a lot of these top decks, that doesn't really matter, and it makes it really hard for this deck to fight currently. Next, Nubatama. I think it's also Rogue. Nubatama has top tier in there, and this deck in theory is really good. It destroys a lot of the control matchups, and then you have a really insane finishing turn with Mizukaze and Rene, and then whenever you go first, you can force the opponent to discard a lot of cards through the history collection stride and potentially the Ride Fixer if you play it. You have a decent early game because of grade 2 Shoujo Doji, and you're able to generate advantage through that. The deck is just all around like pretty solid, just because of how the finishing turns are. This deck won't always kill when it needs to, and then also Sanctitude being a card makes it a bit harder. But Mizukaze Rene is still an absurdly scary combo, and now they have a stronger early game that they are able to play with. So yeah, Nubatama is still pretty good, still a really solid clan. OTT, I think once optimized is a solid pick, but currently it's probably Rogue. This deck plays a lot like Nubatama, where you have a solid early game and then you have like insane late game, except this deck actually has unguardable attacks, unlike Nubatama. Now, the only thing that can block the Ichigashima Popo play is Sanctitude, but these attacks don't naturally gain crits. So how this deck plays is you have two different routes. You have the Ichigashima Popo play, where you draw your entire deck and then you filter your deck into just crits, and then you sack a bunch of crits and put them on your Popos, and then just one-shot people with them. Or you can have the Momo plus Calico play, where you Calico reveal 3 Amaterasus and have Momo gain a shit ton of power and crit. And you can just kill people off the bat like that if their hand isn't good enough to deal with it. OTT in those regards is pretty good. It doesn't auto-lose into Link Joker and Mega Colony, and it can play through some of the insane defenses that some of these clans have, like Granblue, since Granblue won't be able to G-Guard and they lose access to all of their defensive plays. This deck does struggle in the aggro a bit, so Naokami, Bermuda, and Victor are going to kind of beat down this deck early on. And yeah, just like the Nubatama issue, sometimes the kill turn just like doesn't kill. The turn becomes a little bit inconsistent on if it kills sometimes, and if you go for it every game, if you miss it twice, then you're probably out. So that's why I'm putting it in Rogue. If it was way more consistent at it, I'd put it in Solid Pick, but for now I think it's a Rogue deck. Pale Moon, locals, unless your name is Derek Dow, you're probably not topping with this at the moment. Honolly rocks its shit for one, and then the build you play is very weird. If you go Hari, then you're primarily focusing on V Hari still, because that's how you play through Honolly. And you just build like 15 Excel markers and then like swing a bunch of times on there. But a lot of your shield is like super low. The deck dies to these control decks like Ghidorah and Chaos Breaker, and it's really piece reliant. So this deck is like weak to aggro. It's weak to the popular control decks right now. It just like doesn't have enough going for it to play through those. And then Nightmare Dolls, if the opponent plays Honolly, yeah, it's Jova for you. So yeah, I think Pale Moon is locals. Royals is weird. It's like in between locals and Rogue. I'm gonna put it in locals for now because it hasn't topped anything yet. Jewel Knights are okay, and now you play it with Alt Mile, so then you have a strong turn 3 and you can like get multi-attack off. Apparently there's like some aggro Alt Mile deck where you play the game very fast and try to kill as quickly as possible. But yeah, Crystal Luster is still a hell of a card. Crystal Luster Salome together is still really, really good. 3-card Guard Restrict is a pretty good restrict on like 6-7 attacks. It can also play through Mega Colony. It has a hard time into Chaos Breaker because they don't have a way to unlock their stuff, and they don't generate a ton of markers either. So the moment they lose those markers, then the deck kind of loses all of its power. Yeah, it seems like it has an okay matchup into Granblue and Naokami. I'm not 100% sure, but I think these decks will beat Royals more often than not. There's nothing much going for Royals that a lot of these decks above it are already doing, and Royals is just like kind of not the best at anything. It has a stronger finishing turn than some decks. Spike Bows, I think, is Rogue. Rising Greedon's still absurdly strong. One of the stronger grade 3 turns still. Galley is still an absurd card. Like, spikes are in a very, very interesting spot The deck dies to the control decks in the meta at the moment, unfortunately, but it can play really, really fast and has like a small chance to kill them sometimes if they go first. And you do Rising Greed on plays and like swing with your Vanguard 3 times and check a shit ton of cards. If you get a big enough advantage there, then you can just like play Vanguard normally and beat them like that. But yeah, this deck also struggles a bit in the Honolly. Not as badly because they have Lucifer to countercharge during these battle phases. So yeah, I think this deck is still pretty good. It could potentially be here, but I think the deck is just underrepresented right now. Shadows, good luck in esports. This is a weird list, seeing Cargo and Shadow Paladin at the bottom, but Claret Sword Change didn't really add anything for this deck. Like everything it does, Luard is already doing, and there's no GB effects that Shadow Paladin really want that they can cheat out, and your payoff just isn't there. Like Morfessa is still a really good stride, but it has a harder time winning off of it. So you need to play like a bunch of stand triggers in your deck in order to activate Dagda multiple times in a turn. And if you can't do that, then this deck's win condition is not as good as it used to be. And a lot of these decks can do what it does, but way better and more consistently. Tachi, probably locals. If you're not prepared for it, will just like obliterate you sometimes, but this deck also struggles into some of the meta matchups like Mega Colony, because then they can't call things off their gauges, they can't activate all of their like chain calls like Gaia, reviving stuff. There's no Little Tyranno calling stuff from top, there's no calling things from gauges. It struggles into that really, really badly. Into Link Joker, it's also pretty rough. Narukami seems like a rough matchup for the deck, because if you generate your Excels, then Narukami will just hit you like a truck. They bind your important pieces, and then you lose out on a bunch of combo potential through that. But yeah, the deck is still like very funny, very fun. And yeah, that is it for this video. Thank you for watching. These are my current thoughts of the premium format. If you agree, let me know. If you disagree with anything I said or with a placing of something here, let me know too. And yeah, I think this format is okay. It's not the worst format we've had. There's a lot of clans you can play right now where if you're really proficient on that deck and you've learned your matchups, then you can really do a number in these events. Even though a lot of these decks are like high up there's not as many people playing these. You basically have to worry about these decks once you get to higher tables a lot of the time. Because the meta is still like super open, not super open, but it's still like a little bit open where a lot of these clans aren't solved yet, then you will probably see a lot of variety still. So in my New York run, I did not face Narukami. I fought Deleter Loop, but not Chaos Breaker. I fought Messiah, but not Chaos Breaker. I fought DP. I didn't fight Grand Blue. I fought Highlander. I fought a bunch of random stuff, even as I was like in the top tables. So a lot of this meta right now is number one priority is, are you efficient enough on the clan to where you can play this through an event and do at least the correct play 95% of the time? And then after that, you can look into matchups and start thinking about how you can play through those. As long as you have a general idea of what all the other decks in the room are doing, then you should still be doing pretty well. And yeah, that is it. Thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz, and I'll see you guys in the next one.